Hello and welcome to this video on airbrushing equipment. I'm not going to go into the actual airbrushing itself, but I am going to talk about what equipment I've been picking up over the last 13 years or so of airbrushing. I've gone through various stages, some of which I've still got the stages, so I've got my early compressor and I've got my current mega beast compressor from Bambi here as well. So I shall talk through the sort of history of where I started and what I had, and then also talk about the actual equipment itself, and particularly kind of tips about some accessory parts that I find are vital for airbrushing, and I'll sort of show and tell really. I'm going to do follow-up videos with some actual airbrushing, although if you look through my archive of videos I do have some on airbrushing already, which I put up years and years ago. I think one of them was about 8 years old, so the video technique might not be that great, but it's there to look at, and I will be redoing those and revisiting them with some up-to-date video of airbrushing. Yeah, so starting with the compressor, this one I've had now for about 10 years. It's unbranded, it's kind of made in Taiwan. Actually, I don't think it has a brand anywhere, but it was from a sort of local hobbycraft store. And you see a lot of these around looking similar. Some of them don't have the metal casing on, some of them just show the sort of inner workings. You can see the sort of compressor. This is its rear end where it sucks in the air, and then it has the sort of valve equipment on the front where you adjust the rate of air in terms of PSI, which you then attach your airbrush. In fact, what I've done is I've taken off the 1/4 inch adapter from this and plugged it into there for my airbrush, so it's currently a hole on the front where you'd connect to a valve with your airbrush. So yeah, mains plug, British style, 3-prong, and that's your animal. It's quite noisy. I wanted something a bit quieter, which is why I went for the Bambi, which has a reservoir, which I upgraded to about 4 or 5 years ago. But it did the job for me for quite a few years. In fact, I started airbrushing way back, about 13 years ago, for a terrain layout I was doing for a show. And what I'll do now is I'll dive over and show you that as a kind of bit of history, put this thing out of the way. So this was a show I did in, I need to find a date, so let's dive in to have a look at the terrain layout, one of these flicker pictures. So this was 2005, summer of 2005, and it was a show called Bifrost, which was in Birmingham, and this was built to play the sort of grunts game, as I remember. We had we were using this Eagle Lander from Space 1999. This was the Eagle Lander, in fact, on there is a pre-existing kit. Can I zoom in? No, I can't. Maybe if I can zoom in a little bit. But anyway, that's the game we played. The terrain is from Ainsty, and it's their range called Down Below, and I used it to create this sort of airlocked space base. If I go back, you can see some images of it in construction here actually, and you can see how the Ainsty terrain fits on these 30 by 30 centimetre boards, and essentially I created the sort of airlocked areas with double doors so that I could do a scenario that involved sort of opening up an airlock if I wanted to. And also the white styrene on there, because resin shrinks during the casting process. When you put this kind of Ainsty terrain together, you do need to use some styrene rod, which can actually end up looking quite interesting, because when you put it in there, it can look like extra pipes in between the tile pieces that they do. And those tiles, if you see the individual squares on there, I can't really zoom into it, but the individual square panels for the flooring are 3 centimetres by 3 centimetres in size. So when you put it on a 30 by 30 centimetre board, it all sort of fits together, apart from the shrinkage, which is, as I said, you fill in with styrene. So that's not much on airbrushing, is it? I'm talking about terrain now. But basically you can see when I've got the whole layout there, the reason I needed an airbrush was because I was going to do this entire board and I wanted to be able to do it in a way where I wasn't having to get the brush out for hours and hours on end. So yes, it was a convenient way of doing it. And I use that compressor, and I use what was called an Aztec brush back in those days, so I'll show you that. These Aztec brushes are still for sale now. They are, well, I used to think it was an entry-level airbrush, but it's £155 now. When I bought it, it was about £75, but that was 13 years ago. So adjusting for inflation, it's gone up quite a lot. So yes, what is good about the Aztec? Well, for me it was good to start with because I think I can zoom into this one. Yeah. The individual nozzles along the top row there, the different coloured orange, white, black, beige, those are the different needle sizes essentially that adjust the paint flow. So I can't remember which was which, but I know one of them was really high flow, so it was great for that large base area because I could put the nozzle in, you screw it to the front of this silver bit there. It has an individual needle in each one, and you could then cover large areas. So it was great also for cleaning because you don't have a needle running through the whole body, it's only in the nozzle. You can drop the nozzle into some cleaning fluid and it does the job without having to take the whole body apart. You can gravity feed it using one of these pots on the side that sits in the sort of black nozzle now in the middle of the picture there. Or you can do the opposite where you put this sort of can. I use this all the time actually, and I was using Tamiya paints at the time. You decant the paint into this jar, stick it in the side, and when you blast your air through, job done. It's spraying out depending on the nozzle you got at a different fineness. I'm trying to remember now, but I think the finest one was that sort of beige coloured one there. I think was the one I used most of the time. So it was a good workhorse. I think I had it for about 5-6 years or so before I ended up with the HPC Plus, which is the next page I'll take you to. And you can see this looks a little bit more professional, doesn't it? Although price-wise, I think these HPC brushes now are probably similar to the Aztec. I haven't got a price on the page, but this is the Iwata's page. So why did I pick this one? Well, it has obviously a needle type, and let me just see the needle size here. There you go, 0.3 millimeters. And now this is recommended, and obviously I don't know much else apart from the fact I've used it for 6 or so years. It was recommended by various military modelling magazines, and this was the area where I picked up first of all. All those years ago I used to buy military modelling magazines as well as the War Games miniatures magazines, and that's where I found out about this brush. I looked at reviews, I looked at YouTube videos, and this was apparently a good needle nozzle size configuration, and it's also gravity fed from the well on the top. And unlike that Aztec one which I just showed there, you don't have to attach that well, it's always there on the top of it. However, on the one hand, you're getting the benefits of having that all sort of integrated. On the other hand, what you're buying here is a piece of equipment that's kind of precision made compared to the Aztec, and therefore needs more care and attention with cleaning, lubrication. And when I first got it, my clumsy use of the Aztec brush, where I was just throwing paint through and really using it for larger areas, when I got this Iwata, which is a finer brush, I found I was clogging it up. So there were a lot of schoolboy errors made by me on the kind of paint and thickness of the thinning I was doing of the paint that was going in there. So I had a lot of learning to get through, it's particularly cleaning. And I've got a tip on that which I'm going to talk about later, but I'll also do another video where I'll strip down the airbrush and clean it up fully, because you can't really see that stage of things without going into it. So anyway, that's the HPC Plus. I haven't got a price here, but I think I paid about, it was actually, I've got to pretend I don't know what I paid for it, because it was about 6 years ago and it was my 40th birthday, so my wife got it for me. So if you've got a 40th birthday coming up, you know, put one of these on the list. It's a good piece of kit. Also note, if you are buying into airbrushing, it's a good piece. You know, you've got children or you've got a partner that likes to get orange by a tanning station. You could actually get the compressor and buy a separate gun that sits on the front that would allow you to tan your partner. Also, you can do, as well as doing your miniatures, you could have some fun with the kids, and I use this sometimes with the kids to do airbrushing pictures and masking out large pictures and things. So it's a lot of fun to use, and can be you can prime up all those excuses and justifications other than just using it for painting your models for miniature wargaming. And yeah, so back to the size of nozzles and things. That 0.3 needle nozzle on this, it's very, very fine, and allows you to get down to almost doing a, not needle point, but sort of pencil thin lines on a model. But that control needed for that and the closeness you need to get to a miniature is actually quite tricky to do. You'd have to be sort of expert grade to do that kind of very fine control. But it has meant that moving from that Aztec, which I originally had, to the HPC allowed me to upgrade myself in terms of being able to do smaller models. So I was doing 6mm models with this, camo schemes, with masking of course, and so, you know, it's great for the larger 15mm or even bigger tanks, 28mm stuff. If you're into your Weimar 40K, it'd be great for the larger vehicles as well. Even though it's a fine point at 0.3, it does allow you to back off a bit, and then your spread of the paint is very even at a distance. So it's a nice piece of equipment. Right, so onto the compressor. So right, what have we got here? Bambi. This is the BB-8, not to be confused with any Star Wars related stuff, but they call it budget range, but mind you, it was still in the order of about £300, I think, so it's not really that budget. I like it because it's silent. Let's see if I can zoom in. Yeah, the large section at the bottom is the reservoir, so the compressor bits are happening at the top, as well as it's got lots of oil in there, which you have to replace, by the way, maintenance wise. You're meant to put some new oil in there once a year. So you pour the oil in the top, and essentially it uses the oil plus the reservoir to compress the air. And the benefit is that it's silent, because the little motor will buzz away compressing, but once the reservoir at the bottom is filled up, you will be able to see the pressure on the bottom larger gauge here of the reservoir, but then you'll be able to control with the valve the upper level here, which gives you the PSI that you're pumping down through the airbrush. So if I flip back to show it, so this is the Bambi. It's got a large reservoir at the bottom. The motor will run, filling up the reservoir, and then as you use the airbrush, you're pulling your air from this large reservoir, so the little motor turns off and it's essentially running silent for a period of time, which is great. You've got 2 gauges on the front. The bottom one shows you the reservoir pressure, so you know when it's sort of running down, when it's about to kick in with the compressor again. And also this controls the PSI here. Pop that up and you can set your PSI level there and then pop it back down. I tend to run at, I think it's between 10 to 15 and 20, never really above 20 PSI. So I usually set it and forget it, really, and just leave it on whatever setting I prefer. As I say, it's typically between 10 and 15. So that's it. I mean, it's a beast. I put it on wheels, on kind of a piece of plank of wood, and then some sort of chuck style wheels on behind it. You can sort of see them there if I pull it out. And that's just handy for moving around, because it's a real heavy monster. And if you're moving around a workshop or somewhere, having it on a set of wheels is convenient. So yeah, that's great. Yes, so in terms of connectivity, it's 1/4" threaded hose. I've got braided hose here. Traditionally you could go right from this sort of threaded area and directly onto the body of the airbrush. However, in between mine I've got a quick release. So that's the first tip. Look out for a quick release, because there's nothing better than just being able to pull it off without all the unscrewing. Particularly if you had some bother with the airbrush, like it was clogged up or something and you needed to give it some quick attention in mid-process. Doing all that unscrewing can be a pain. So the quick release has a kind of ring pull around the side that you pull down, pop it on, and it closes the seal. Underneath that I've got a condenser, which is this sort of plastic bodied section, and it's meant to gather moisture in there. I haven't had a great deal of moisture gather in there, to be fair, because there's quite a good condenser already on the compressor here, which again captures moisture, which is going to be more of a problem if you're in a more humid climate, say Florida, southern states of America. You might want to consider getting one of these in-line ones as well as the one on the compressor. But I'd give it a go first before you start buying all these accessories. But definitely first tip is that quick release. It's worth having. So next up I'm going to zoom into the workbench, and I'm going to show you some of the smaller bits of equipment and necessary items I use for airbrushing and accessories. So here we go. The first accessories, which everybody in airbrushing needs, is one of these booths. Essentially it allows you to pull a stream of air through a filter which cleans the worst and bigger particles out of the air. Then the fan will pump that air, hopefully out of a window, to pollute the world instead of your hobby room. And again, I've had this one for about 6 or 7 years. It's never broken down. They're relatively cheap, sort of I think it was around the £50 mark. I did have to buy the hose separately, and I've had to replace the filter several times. The filters aren't too expensive. And of course they're only capturing the thicker particles, which you can sort of see gather on it. The rest goes out of the hose. They're not that noisy, they're quite good in terms of not too irritating. And say it does fold down, you can see the body at the back where the fan is, and then this plastic booth area. So if you're spraying into there, it tends to draw the air through the filter and out the back and out of here. You still need mask protection though, because if you were to pump this into your room without the hose sticking out of a window or out of the garage door, you will still be breathing in a lot of fumes. And acrylic paint of course doesn't break down, so I wouldn't want that in my lungs, although I've probably got plenty in there over the years from painting. So now I'm down a bit closer, I shall go through sort of the essential bits and pieces which I use. 1 or 2 tips. Also I won't show the demo of some of the tips because I haven't got the airbrush set up and running, but I'll do that in a future video where I go over how I use it. So starting with the airbrush itself, I'll give you a bit of an overview of this particular airbrush. So it's Iwata HPC Plus. You've got the reservoir in the top. Pop on. It's not been used for a little while, but you can see the reservoir in there, which is where you put your paint, and then the air is drawn up through the hose from the compressor when you press down and release that button. So when that button is pushed down, the valve to the air is open, and the further you pull back, the more air is mixed with the paint, allowing you that sort of fine control. The further you pull back, the more paint's going to come spraying out. So it's easy to say that, but then once you do it, you'll have some fun getting that fine control just right. And hopefully in another future video I'll go through some of my techniques and show you that in action. However, as far as the body goes, you have a thing at the front here which is This is called a crown, in fact. Let me see if I can focus that in. Okay, well hopefully that will stay in focus, but I've just taken the crown off at the front here, which is a screw-on element, and you can see the needle. I don't know if you're going to be able to see that, but that's showing there. So when you push down and pull back, it's pulling that needle back, which is opening the amount of air at the front to allow more paint through there. And the reason to use a crown shape, which I've got here, rather than just a round one, because some of them don't have the crown. Hopefully you can see the crown shape. But anyway, the crown allows you to get closer to the subject, and the spare air sprays out the side, which means you can get finer control and smaller lines. So if you don't have a crown, it still works fine for most miniature hobby and work, but there's definitely a benefit to having that crown on there. In regard to the body itself, you have got the ability to strip it down. The back comes off. And in fact, the bit out the back there, that is the needle, and it runs all the way through. And it's clasped here, so that when you do that, you can see that whole mechanism moves back. And that's just basically pulling the needle, which is blocking the gap at the front here, the nozzle at the front, and then when it pulls back it allows some air and paint through. Additionally, you can restrain how far you can pull back. If you're doing really fine work and you don't want to accidentally go all the way back, you can restrain that by tightening up and loosening this section. And the whole thing needs to come apart from here if you're going to clean inside. So moving from the Aztec, which I showed before, to this, there's a lot more maintenance to do to get inside and keep it clean. I can see there's some gunk in there already, which I've not cleaned. So yeah, that's the Iwata, and it's been a really good workhorse for me for about 5 or 6 years. It's a nice piece of kit. You can see that I've got paint and bits on the side that haven't sort of cleaned off, but nothing in there. Nothing's a problem for it. It keeps nice and clean. So I shall now start to run through the various bits of equipment that I use. So starting off, this guy, I got it on eBay. It's essentially bolts to the side of your desk, clamp style, but it allows the airbrush, in fact up to 2 airbrushes if you've got to sit in there. So that's your first schoolboy error that you'll make if you are new to airbrushing. If you don't get one of these, you'll be really pleased with your new airbrush, and you'll be spraying up your Space Marines, and then you'll want to put it down and you'll go, and of course you've got a lid on the top there, but it's not a sealed lid. There is a gap to allow air through there, and I don't typically put that on very tight either. So you'll sort of go, it's half of this is full of paint, you've got one model in your hand, you need to pick another up, you want to put it down, and you'll be sort of thinking of places to rest it, where that doesn't tip over, and then you end up with a massive pool of paint on the floor or on your desk. So basic first thing, see if you can get something like this. Typically an Airbrush Stand is what you need to search for on eBay, and it's a very handy piece of kit. I use it all the time. I just have it on the side. On the side of the desk, it sort of fits over like that. You can still see it in the frame, I think, and then it bolts down and you put it in. I can't remember the make of this one. I did a search. I either bought it from Airbrushes UK, airbrushes.com, or I got that from eBay probably. So yeah, first thing to get stand, definite wise investment to avoid spillages, and just to have somewhere to rest it, because this whole cable thing, it's just fussy. If you can dump that down on the side of your desk, it's ideal. So following on from that, put that to the side. Now the other thing is, so protection. I've already shown the compressor earlier, and you want to make sure that you've got something to keep your eyes covered up. To be fair, most of the time now, because I'm using glasses all the time, I keep my glasses on. But these guys will, I think these ones do fit over your glasses. It's got air holes on the side there to stop them from steaming up. So I've used those. Also, these kind of lab glasses are handy because they do go over your glasses typically. They're both a bit duffed up now. So that's for your eyes, and I do recommend it. I get really itchy, irritated eyes, even with the filter filtering out with the booth there. So what else have I got here? Yeah, so then in terms of your eyes, that's covered. But then you might want something like this, which is a face mask. Even again with the compressor, get one of these face masks to start with, just to keep the paint from going down into your lungs. And these are relatively cheap. You probably get these for a couple of pounds each, for disposable ones on eBay. I sometimes use that, but also on eBay, also on eBay, I invested in this. So it has replaceable filters on the front, which you can get for different types of air and dust and paint. And it has valves for breathing through, so you're never breathing anything out. So when it says valves for breathing out, so you're breathing through the filter and you're breathing out through those. There's smaller ones of these where you're just getting the nose and mouth guard instead of the visor as well. And the company is called Sunstrom. Anybody in the paint trade that knows this stuff will understand that Sunstrom, they're quite a well-known brand. I think they might be German. But yeah, it gets a bit hot and stuffy in there, but does make sure that you're not breathing in that stuff. I mean, if I use that, I get no irritation. But if I'm not using this, I will find that my eyes will get irritated or something. I'll feel like I've got a cold or something or other after I've done it. So there's the logo. They're quite expensive, although this was second-hand. So I think there's usually an active trade of these on eBay, and the reason for it is that companies often buy these safety bits of equipment when they do some building work, and after the contract's done, they might throw them out, or they might have a few of the old valves, the old filters left that they put on eBay. So you might find that. So that's a full-on face mask. Maybe you might think it's a bit over the top, but for me, I was getting quite irritated around my eyes. It kept feeling like I had a cold when I was doing airbrushing before I put that on. I say, even with the air booth as well, there was still enough dust and paint particles around to irritate. Although to start with, I think one of these would be fine with a pair of safety glasses or just your normal glasses. The other thing to use, which is, well, before I dive into that, absolutely vital, maybe I should have put these over before, is these pipettes. So available again on eBay. I think you can get these cheap as like 2 to 5p each. Don't buy them in a hobby store, get them cheap on eBay, maybe from China. So you could essentially decant from your paint or from your thinner using the pipette, and then drop into the top of the reservoir there. So yeah, pipettes, have these to hand, always have these to hand, because decanting between things is annoying. But moving on to the paints, these are sort of Model Air type, and I've got an AK one here as well, AK Interactive, and these are specially made for airbrushing, so they tend to be a bit thinner. Although that matte varnish there isn't an airbrush one. These are the Model Air range from Vallejo, I think that's how you pronounce it. And this is the AK Interactive. And because they've got the dripper type tops, you can basically just drop those straight in to there, neat. But what you might want to do is then put a little bit of thinner in, because it's another essential to have to hand. This is a life colour thinner, but all the different brands do their own thinners as well. You might want to drop a couple of bits of that in as well, in which case, again, the pipette comes in. And if you haven't got something to decant, and obviously it's just a tip again over the years, it's just irritating when you haven't got that. You end up using a brush, or you might pour a paint, or you might get a funnel and drip it in, and it's just not it's not easy to do. So pipettes are a definite plus. you'll ruin these instantly, these pipettes as well. They clog up with the paint quickly. You can nip the end off, as you can see. You can sort of cut the sections apart to nip the end off, but to reuse them. But yeah, expect to throw these away pretty quickly. So another vital item is cocktail sticks. Falling all over the place. I can't live without them. Definitely wise investment to have a little pot of these sitting around, because again, when you're I should have never taken that lid off then. That was a bad move. It'll take me half an hour to get these back in. This is going to be fun. Oh. So there you go, that's back together. But again, I wouldn't recommend poking them into your airbrush in, deep inside there, because you don't want little bits of wood or anything coming off. But if you've put some thinner and something else in the top of there, some paint, or you've mixed two paints and you've not mixed them separately in a separate pot, there's nothing better than just a quick cocktail stick in there to sort of whiz around, and that will give you a quick mix up. That's if you're mixing in there, but I tend to quite often thin things quite a lot. I might have some paint left in the bottom end there, and I'll just drop in some thinners. So definitely get your cocktail sticks, have those to hand. The other thing that cocktail sticks are useful for, inside these crowns on the front, depending on which one you've got, again, the cocktail stick, you can whip that off and you can just, pick out some paint before it's fully dried on. So it's just useful to have them around to scratch away at anything that's annoying, or to stir. So great, always have those. I never live without those. We've done the pipettes. So onto the sort of materials. Airbrush cleaner. This is Vallejo one. I tend to sometimes, if I've finished a whole paint job, I will I will stick some of these through at the final stage just to clean out things. Also might drop the odd component into a little pot to really leave it for a while to get that cleaner on it. So yeah, keep a store of that. You can get much bigger pots than this. I don't know why I've got such a small one there, but I've got a few of those sitting around. And then thinners. So this is a different brand, Life Colour. They're Italian. They do a range of paints, which, if you've watched any of my other videos, I really like the Life Colour range of paints. They are nice strong pigment, and they can work for brushing, normal brush work, or for airbrush. And that's why I bought their brand, although I found their thinner works great for all the brands as well. I don't have any clogging or other problems. So as I say, in another video I'm going to talk about cleaning and clogging up problems. But one tip I find absolutely the most vital thing that saved my skin several times is these, just a spray, a high pressure spray of water, having one of those to hand. And the reason for that is, in the early days of me airbrushing, with this piece of equipment, with this particular airbrush, about 6 years ago, I used to have these sort of crazy ways of trying to clean between different paint colours. So what I would do is, I might have, just 4 or 5 mils of basically paint left in the bottom of the reservoir, and I would go, oh no, I'm going to clean that out. I'll just throw in the airbrush cleaner, whoosh, splosh, bish bash bosh, spray that out. I'd spray it actually into a jar, so just into an old large jam jar. I'd spray down, and the cleaner would flood out the remaining paint and clean that out. However, this cleaner, it breaks down paint, and what that means is it kind of goes kind of cleggy, if you've heard of that word before, kind of sticky, cleggy, lumpy. So if you've got paint left in and you put the cleaner in, it's going to turn what you've got into there into clegg. And when you try and spray it through, it goes through, but you'll get residue in there, and the residue will be a mixture of paint and cleaner, which is essentially clegg. So that will cause you problems. So my early use of the airbrush, where I would leave some, I'd go, oh, I've not quite finished the paint, I know what, I'll just splosh that in, wasn't good. So my advice there, and it's important advice because I've clogged this up so many times. Get the high pressure sprayer like this, and I will demo this when I'm actually got paint and I'm in live action on another video. But while you've got a little bit of paint left in the bottom of there, don't push it through the brush. Simply spray this in and pour it out, and that just seemed to just save my skin so much. So many times where I end up with a blockage, and that just stopped it from happening. So any paint left, really stiff spray in there. So you want a pump action like this with a really powerful action on the top. I mean, it says it's a scenic sprayer by Woodland Scenics, but really it's just any pump action water bottle will do. It is only water, by the way. Yeah, it's only water in there. It's not cleaner. So you're not going to get the cleggage. It's not going to block up. So you just spray it in and pour out the paint. And rather than keep spraying it through like I was doing, thinking that was the wise thing to do to clear it through with the airbrush cleaner. Then once you've done this sort of splosh, splosh, splosh in there, pour out, you'll find there's practically nothing in the bottom. So then spray a bit more, and then I brushed it through. So then I would just pull fully back, put it into a sort of jam jar inside the air booth so that any remaining spray gets sucked out. And then you're spraying through almost clean water, and you'll find it just looks like a lovely brass shiny thing in the bottom, and it just sort of naturally cleans itself out. But at the end of your paint job, when you're finished up, use the airbrush cleaner, but as I say, I wouldn't use airbrush cleaner when you've got acrylic paint in there because it will clegg. That's in my experience anyway. You may have a different view on that. Please post comments. Friendly ones welcome. So that's the two materials. So water, very important. High pressure spray straight in there to sploss out the paint when you've done your job and you've finished with it. Thinners to thin and obviously decant by using a pipette in there. And the airbrush cleaner, use sparingly when the brush looks empty of paint. I wouldn't put it in when you've got paint in there. So that's a recap. Continued on the material side, Super Lube lubricant. So let me see if I can zoom in on this at all. Probably not. Yep, there we go. So this is Super Lube. It's essentially just a lubricant, and it's non-silicone, and the idea is it's by Iwata, the guys that make the airbrushes, but the idea is that you use this just to drip in. Again, once the brush is cleaned, you drip it in the mechanism. I put some in the pot there, and I actually pull backwards and forwards to make sure the needle gets some on it through the body. And then I store the airbrush away. So between usage, it's not going to dry out. I don't know why the drying is a major issue, but I have noticed it helps with the mechanism doesn't get as jammed by using the Super Lube. So it's literally a tiny drop or two in there. But you've got to have this stuff because before, again, lots of clogging, jamming, blockages, and this seemed to help that, especially around this mechanism at the back here. So back down, focusing down here. Okay, so I've gone through those few things. So what's next? So paint wise, as I was saying, the dropper types that are built and made for airbrushing, that say air or whatever airbrush range like these life colours are, will work for air. They're meant to be sort of pre-thinned, but I tend to still thin them more, so have some thinner to hand to use that. And I think I'll go through the more fine level of detail on paint mix and stuff when I do a demo of the airbrush in use. But I cannot tell you more. Absolutely, I'll hammer that home. Make sure you have a spray bottle to hand because it just cleans the muck out of there instantly. I mean, it's messy. You need quite a large jar, and you're spraying in there with it, and it splodges everything out of the reservoir that you haven't used. But it's just a great way of quickly cleaning, and then you can put your next colour paint in without worrying that there's any left in there once you've sprayed the water through. And obviously also I tend to spray with the lid on. I know I mentioned I've got the stand, the airbrush stand, vital thing to be able to rest it so that you're resting it at that angle and it's not tipping the paint out. But keeping the lid on just means that, and you know, if you did accidentally go one way or another, you're not going to instantly have paint coming out all over the place. So that's that. Yes, so I've talked about the breathing apparatus. So two things here together that are worth having. Blue tack. So I've got another video on YouTube, again probably 5 or 6 years old, where I use this blue tack or white tack, whatever you want to call it. Traditionally used for putting posters up on walls and leaving a stain behind, but this stuff is meant to be sort of stain free. This Bostik blue tack. So it's sort of stretchy stuff. Tends to be quite cheap, and benefits are of course that when paired with these sticks, if you're working on say 15mm or a set of infantry or 6mm models, or even 28mm, you could put it on there if you had the right kind of base. I put a splat of the old blue tack on the stick, and then I can mount the models in a row on there. Yeah, so as a quick demo of that, got a model there, happens to be one on that has a base. Obviously it's not as easy with models that are on slotters, although if you had like a resin base you could pre-mount it. Obviously once you've got the blue tack on there, you've then got, while you're airbrushing, a convenient way to move the sort of model around, and so highly recommend these sort of oversized lollipop sticks really. So if I just focus in on this little guy, here you go. So yeah, definitely get some of these large lollipop sticks from a hobby shop, eBay. I think they're called just lollipop large sticks, but you can use them for multiple things. Obviously you could use them for terrain building and things as well, but in terms of this, if you had 15mm scale models, you could put them in a row on there and spray a whole group at once, and then take the stick away afterwards and continue to work on it. Or if you've done some airbrushing and masking and then you're done, you can just pop them off. And obviously, as I said in another video, I'll do it again, but I used blue tack to mask for camo. So you actually take some of this stuff and pop it on the model in different areas. That's not suitable on a character model like this, but if it was a tank, you put the blue tack on different areas, and when you spray you get a nice camo effect if you put it on top of a base colour. So that's that. See if we can zoom back in again. So yeah, lollipop sticks, so I've spoken about them. Blue tack, absolutely vital again in your equipment, airbrushing equipment stack. And the other thing is just reference card, and I keep some of these old bits of card that I've had for a while, or an old envelope, and just keep that beside you on the spray booth or something so that you can just do a quick tester. And the other thing is the first time you spray, which again I'll talk about in a guide when I'm doing some work, but sometimes you get splatter because there'll be a little larger driplet on the bottom of the, or droplet even, on the end of the needle in between spraying, and then the first time you pull back it splats it out. The higher quality gear, and if you thinned the paint correctly, it's typically not such a problem, but always best to just spray on a piece of card. You can see the colour, you can see it's coming out evenly, and that you're not going to get a big splodge go straight out onto the model. So it's another thing you might get when you first start. Take your time, have a pad like this beside you, or the other vital thing, obviously, some kitchen roll around, so that you can just spray onto it and see what the colour is, and also check the evenness before you go back to the model. So you might be doing a section of spraying, even though you might stop for a second just while you move around to another area, it's worth spraying on there first just to get any drops off and making sure that you get an even spray. So yeah, card white as well, so that you can see easily what the thing is. And then the other thing here, which I use sometimes, there's special brushes you can get for the airbrush. And these aren't always that great, to be fair, these pipe cleaners, because the cheaper ones can leave bits of pipe cleaning fluff behind. So I have some little mini brushes, I haven't got them to hand, which I sometimes use to clean out. But I might also use one of these just to get through the back of the mechanism and during the cleaning sort of phase. So I've gone through lots of these over the years, but the little brushes tend to, the other problem I've had with the little brushes, they're purpose built by Iwata, but they leave the little hairs of the brush get left behind sometimes if you're a bit too vigorous with it. So these are okay, they do the job, and if you make sure you've sort of cleaned it out properly, you're fine to go. So yep. Oh, I was going to show you on the Aztecs. These are one of the old nozzles I've got from my Aztec. And you can see it screws in. It's got a needle in the end there, and you can see it's got a kind of mini crown along the top. And obviously that's the that's essentially the whole needle in one little tiny mechanism, and the back sort of pushes in, which releases the needle when it's in the Aztec mechanism. If I get to dig my old Aztec out, I will show that again in more detail, but you know, it's well worth having a look at one of these, because I think the Aztec is a good starting airbrush if you're a bit daunted by all the cleaning that comes with the bigger unit. One thing I will show a bit closer up on now is on the airbrush. I can show that quick release mechanism. You just pull and it's off, and again, if you're likely to want to put it down into the airbrush holder, which I showed earlier, and you can see the pullback mechanism that allows it in, and then there's the condenser which pulls out any air, and it's inline. They call this inline condenser because it's in the hose line essentially, but the compressors themselves typically have a condenser on them as well. Right. Oh, size wise, there you go, it's 6 inches long. Not that is a kind of detail you really need to know, but there you go, it's these are about 6 inches long. And on that note, thank you very much for listening in, and hopefully you've learnt something. Oh, the only other, I've forgotten something. In addition to the pipettes, it's worth getting some, and all these companies do them, and you can get them on eBay, blank pots as well, because when you're mixing paints, you need somewhere to store it, especially if you've got a big lot of miniatures you're doing, and you mix just the perfect blend of white, say, to highlight on a grey or something, and it's best to store it separately, because you don't want to just be keeping it. You don't want to keep it in there. You don't want to fill this up and then leave it. You can't leave it overnight or anything. You've got to take that paint out. At least I'd never leave it overnight. I'd only ever clean it straight after use. So yeah, so in terms of cleaning it straight after use, you want to make sure you've got a spare pot if you've mixed a colour up you like. But what I tend to do is just buy the next grade up of colour. So if I've got a desert sand colour, I'll get the lighter grade of desert sand and use that rather than constantly mixing up different coloured pots, because that can just get messy, it can dry out. So yeah, try and aim for getting one colour for one tone, if at all possible, rather than having lots of blends, because you'll end up with lots of pots of mixed together paint. Oh, of course, the other thing is, if you get some experience at it, I'm not saying I'm super experienced, but I would be quite reasonably capable and confident that I could squirt in a couple of different colours of maybe some white on that, and that I'd be able to repeat that again on my next mix up. So then I'd use a tiny amount of it out of the reservoir, I'd run out, and then I'd go, okay, splosh some of that brown in, put a bit of white in, stir it up with a cocktail stick, again, vital you've got those, and then spray away again. And then you'll go, oh my goodness, I made it too light. But it's, with an airbrush you can go on subtly, and it tends to work out really. Looks quite good, works out. So thanks for listening in, and watch the space for some actual airbrush action when I get my act together to do another video and take you through some basics of airbrushing. I'll probably do some camo on a vehicle rather than going down onto a figure at this stage. I'll do a sort of vehicle, 15mm vehicle on my next video. Okay, thanks for listening in. Goodbye.